Want to welcome everyone back on in to the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It is brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network with hosts Amie, Alanson, Dundon. And Amie, I have to ask you before we introduce Dr. Thomas officially, Jody McCloud Missmer, what are we doing? The paycheck's not going through here? What's going on with Jody? Where is she?
Yeah, Jody decided to run in a monsoon on Saturday. And another reason that running is not on my bucket list. And she apparently is feeling a little under the weather as a result of her jog in the monsoon.
Okay. Under the weather because of the weather is what it sounds like.
Correct.
Well, we are certainly sending our love to Jody as always. And with you today, Dr. Alex Thomas. Dr. Thomas is a forensic psychiatrist. And I am very excited to have you on board with us today because this is a continued episode. We started with the fascination with true crime, and we're going to keep that one rolling right along as we introduce Dr. Alex Thomas. Dr. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. So this conversation was one of our most listened to podcasts going back to true crime. And I don't think that's any surprise because true crime is one of the most listened to genres out there. So I guess I have to ask, as I introduce you as a forensic psychiatrist, how did you, this is a very interesting field to start in. So how did you end up in your path down forensic psychiatry?
Well, I moved to this area from New York City in 1989. And I used to moonlight at the Rikers Island prison for about a year in my final year residency. That's how I got involved with this. Plus, we had a forensic unit for women prisoners at Elmhurst Hospital, where I was trained. And so I was fascinated by this. That's how I got a feel for this. And since I moved here, I was given the opportunity to do forensic evaluations for the Northampton County Court, which I have been doing for more than 20 years now.
That's excellent. So if someone were to walk up to you and you introduce yourself, hey, I'm Dr. Thomas, and you say, I am a forensic psychiatrist, and they say, what is that? How would you explain it?
Well, forensic psychiatrist is the one who usually does a forensic evaluation, a mental health evaluation or a psychiatric evaluation on a patient. And most of the time, the judges look for recommendations. Do they have a psychiatric illness? Are they competent to stand trial? That's the main thing. Are they able to stand trial because of a mental illness, or are they guilty or not guilty because by reason of insanity defense? So those are the things we look for and make recommendations to the court.
Excellent.
Yeah, so Dr. Thomas is the real deal, Crockett.
So Amie, that's why I wanted to, so I'm going to come back to you to kind of pull these two episodes together right now. First of all, yes, he is the real deal. If you were paying attention to all that, yes, he is the real deal. So going back to our true crime episode 1 and now this one, what brings Dr. Thomas on board with us today, and how do those two episodes, are we now going to cross paths with those and intertwine them?
Yeah, I think one of the things Jody and I really wanted to bring together was, you know, in our last episode was, okay, why are we all glued to TV shows and podcasts about true crime? And today, kind of talk a little bit about why do people do bad things? We're fascinated with criminals and crime, and especially the big name serial killers. And I think it's real important that we take a step back and kind of peel the layers of the onion away a little bit and talk about what makes people do bad things. And what are some warning signs and some things that we should be kind of looking out for in our everyday life? And what are the things we probably really don't have to worry so much about? And what are some trends and patterns? And just kind of having a discussion about why does this happen? Why do people choose to take the life of another person? Or why do people choose to abuse another person? And I think tying those two things together, Dr. Thomas is our perfect guest today for that.
So Dr. Thomas, I'll come to you and I'll piggyback right off of kind of a point that Amie made there. I guess for a lack of better words, a particular trait or some part of someone's personality that leads them down this path. as a forensic psychiatrist, are there particular traits? Are there certain key things that you're looking at? And if so, what are they?
Well, we call it as the antisocial personality disorder. People who are sociopaths, people who are not adhering to social norms. So they just violate the rules and regulations of society. So sometimes they have no guilt, no conscience. So they derive some kind of pleasure from it. And that is what antisocial personality is. So that's what we usually look for. And it's a common myth. A lot of people believe that people who kill others have a mental illness. That is a myth. Only less than 5% people have serious mental illnesses who are serial killers and who commit those kind of horrible crimes. Maybe some person, maybe 25% may have anxiety and PTSD and depression and some other underlying conditions, but majority of them are doing it not because of a mental illness. That's the first thing I want to make it clear.
Which to me is a little scary, honestly. I mean, even being in the field, I want to believe as a human being that people that do really bad things, we can explain it by some sort of mental or psychiatric disease. And the fact that we can't necessarily, there's no causation there in terms of a mental illness and something like that is a little scary. I mean, in my experience, a lot of times people do bad things because it's a power or a control issue, in terms of trying to find a way to gain or regain a sense of power, a sense of being able to have ultimate control.
That is true. But, most of the other times, people kill because they want to steal, they want to rob, those kind of things. That's maybe an ultimate motive. But other than that, some of them may have a violent background. They were abused themselves. That could also lead to them resorting to violence. And some of them is taking a revenge on people for perceived injustices to them. So they take it on other people, especially innocent victims. And for some reason, they derive some kind of pleasure and satisfaction that they took a revenge for this, even though the innocent victims are the result of this.
Yeah.
It's interesting when he made that point about just 5% of people with mental illnesses are typically the people committing these crimes. Amie, I saw you look right at the camera and just that was kind of your point of being like, see, he knows what he's talking about. And I came away at that number very fascinated, because that means that you mentioned the majority, Dr. Thomas, 95% do not fall into that category. So I guess, so to kind of intertwine these two thoughts again, for people that are fascinated with the idea of true crime, do you find that, look, again, I'll say that I thought a 95 to 5% number was a much bigger majority than I possibly would have anticipated. Shame on me for thinking like that, but that was a number that I thought would have been a lot closer in percentages. Do you find that an interest with true crime, it's because I think how people try to understand what brings people to this point? Do you think that that's the fascination of a listener or a viewer of the true crime genre? Just that fascination that, as you said, 95% of these people are not suffering from mental illness, probably have a gripe in one way or another with somebody who they feel has done them wrong. Is that kind of where the fascination is, where people probably in a similar thought process to myself are just thinking it's incredible that 95% of the people that are doing this are not thinking or not much different than I might feel about somebody that I come across in a grocery store, or that I might come across because I've got a problem on an interstate highway with someone who cut me off. Is that kind of where you think that fascination stems from?
I believe so, because, it's very disturbing to know that, 94% people, they don't have a mental illness. So they just act out of spite, out of revenge, out of something some injustice they feel was done to them, or because of their violent background or fascination. And sometimes they do it just to get attention in the wrong way. And sometimes it's our fascination with media coverage itself can lead to copycat murders. So that can also happen. So if we publicly do this and give a lot of importance to the media coverage for these kind of killings and stuff like that, that is going to glorify them in some way. And that is actually idolizing some people in their minds. So they are driven to copycat these things.
Amie, we certainly have had our share of conversations about social media on this podcast and its impact on people, just its impact on people. Feels like everyone, the vast majority of people are on social media in some way. Certainly that could play a role in how some people think, how some people feel. Can you kind of elaborate on where Dr. Thomas was just kind of alluding to on just media coverage in this social media age? Maybe how situations like this are, I'll ask it like this. Are situations like this more common because of copycats and things like that? Or is it just that we are so inundated with information now that maybe these stories are out there going way back when, and we just didn't know them because they weren't shared, they weren't told in such a great way? And kind of, can it be both things? Do you think it's one more than the other? But just kind of that impact of media coverage, as Dr. Thomas was alluding to.
I think it can be both things. I think so we know that people have been, human beings have been hurting each other since the dawn of time. This isn't a new trend. It isn't because of a social media platform. This is an innate human beings, as just how we're made and who we are, we're actually biologically predisposed to violence in certain situations. Our brain sparks aggression in response to perceived danger, and that's been since, caveman, saber-toothed tiger days, which I think we've talked about before on this podcast. But do I think that it seems like it's increasing because of our exposure to social media? Yeah, I think we can turn on the news, any station, and see things that in the 1800s they weren't able to do that. So you just didn't know about it. I think it's there, and I think that there are certain personality disorders that lend themselves to needing attention, and so social media is a good way to get noticed. Not always for the right reasons, but I think that lends itself to it.
Another thing I would suggest is the fascination with guns and violence and the easy access to guns. Yeah. I think that's another reason, because most of the homes here, they have guns, and are they safely locked up? We don't know. Most of the time it is not. So they have easy access to it. And that's another reason why I think there is more increase in the serial killings and increase in violence.
True, but one of the I'm going to say true, and that brings up something that, as I was kind of thinking about this over the past 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I was thinking about the ways that people harm each other, and in particular, I was looking at certain mental health issues and how we hurt other people. And how personal, so guns versus knives, let's just say. And I was reading, and I'm hoping that you can prove this right or dispel it, that murders or harm to family members tend to be more personal. There tends to be more of sharp object violence within families. Also, schizophrenia lends itself more to folks using a sharp object like a knife rather than a gun. So do you think that the closeness, that in terms of whether you love somebody or not, or live with somebody, does that change the method of the way somebody harms somebody else?
I believe what it boils down is the access.
Okay.
What kind of weapons they have access to. So that's what I
So
think.
knives are easy.
Easy, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's easily available in the kitchen right there.
Right. Okay.
So I guess to piggyback a little bit off of what you were kind of talking about there, Amie, Dr. Thomas, I want to ask you, in your experience, how much of the interactions that you've had have been because of personal relationships, and particularly with the points that we were kind of just making, the accessibility maybe we have to things more than we've had in the past. I guess I'll ask, the question will be, how much would you say is with a personal background to it, and how much of it do you think is just a momentary reaction? How many situations do you think are just happening in a, I kind of alluded to a road rage scenario or something like that earlier. Do you see a balance between those two? Is it definitely more personal? And I guess to your point, especially with the recent access there is to different kind of weapons and things like that, do you see the momentary reaction kind of killings have an uptick now because of that?
Yes, I have seen that, especially even in educated people. I know a professional who had a gun in his, he had a license to carry a gun, but out of road rage, he took it out and shot at somebody, and he lost his professional license. And so that can happen to anyone, even educated people. It can happen in the heat of the moment. So that is very common.
And so,
what about the other, Crockett? The other going along with that, I guess my follow-up question would be, how common is? I want to talk a little bit about postpartum. We've heard stories over the years of people harming, new moms harming their babies or their children, in whether it's postpartum psychosis or postpartum depression or some sort of break. I mean, is that, do you see that often?
Yeah, it's very rare nowadays, but I have seen that in the past. But that violence has sort of come down, probably because there are more screening methods.
We're getting better
we are getting better at diagnosing and stopping it before it gets to that point. Yes.
Right.
But it is very common in third world countries.
Oh, really?
Yes, because the psychiatry is not that advanced in third world countries, so it's very common there.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow. So I guess that'll kind of lead me into the next part of where I kind of want to go in this conversation, and that would be the legal process and the conversations that you have, and how a forensic psychiatrist or forensic psychiatry for that matter are kind of used in the legal process. Because I'm sure when it comes to postpartum, or it comes to a situation that maybe needs a little bit more definition than just this person had a bad day and decided to react upon that. Can you kind of go into a little bit about your role in kind of the legal process and in a situation, whether it be postpartum, whether it be road rage, just where your input kind of comes in a situation like that?
So that's when we do the forensic evaluation. That's like a regular psychiatric evaluation, finding out if they have a pre-existing diagnosis, if they were subject to drugs or alcohol, or if they have a family history, those kind of things. And then we have to recreate the crime scenario like a detective does. At the time of the incident, were they acting because of a psychiatric condition like psychosis, or because of an irresistible impulse? So that's how so it takes a lot of time and effort to recreate the scene at the time of the crime. Were they acting under the influence of any psychotic disorder, any depression or impulses? So that's what we do in the evaluation on a detailed basis. Yes.
It's fascinating, because as we're kind of talking about some of the very nuanced details that I'm sure and evaluate certainly more than a common person who's maybe just listening to a podcast or watching something on YouTube or a documentary, those details can be so finite. And I'm sure as part of a legal process, your word is an important part and an impact. And I just want to, we keep talking about media coverage and social media, and I can't help but ask this question, because prime example, my wife is a true crime nut, loves it. We were outside working yesterday, And I had to stop using a drill because she got into a good part of her podcast and wanted to make sure that she could hear the phone call that was being played back in the podcast, just to give you an idea on that. It seems like, look, the numbers don't lie. It seems like it is an incredibly growing genre. It is an elite genre, certainly when it comes to other listening and watching things, forms of media that people can find. Amie, you and I with Jody kind of alluded to this the last time we talked about the fascination with true crime, about, you know, my wife likes to listen to it because of the positive things that she can get from it. That maybe if she's walking down a street by herself, she's thinking of different things that she's heard of in a podcast that she can utilize to her advantage. On the flip side of that, we've also kind of elaborated on copycats and where people might try to use this as a form of information for themselves to do bad things. Dr. Thomas, I have to ask you, in general, in a world where this information is pretty much at everybody's fingertips, what do you feel like about the genre of true crime? And do you think that it does more harm than good? Or do you think that it's just a place for people to listen and get a story told and not be done with it, but just go to it for the act of leisure versus informational? And just all in all, would you say that true crime and the accessibility to it in the media is a more positive thing or a negative thing?
I believe it is more negative in a sense that they get more wide publicity and coverage. So that's the negative part of it. But the positive, there is also a positive part of it, that it educates people. So we can actually look for signs of people who might be prone to doing this. For example, I read somewhere that 4 out of 5 instances of these kind of serial crimes and stuff like that, they would have told somebody about this, or somebody had knowledge, prior knowledge. 4 out of 5 people, 5 times. So that is something good. So they did not report it to the authorities on time. So they could have prevented something like that.
Wow. What do you think?
So that's an educational piece. So there are both pros and cons, but I think it's more cons than pros for this kind of situation to be disseminated in the media.
Amie, what do you think about that? Because I'm fascinated that 4 out of every 5 serial crimes committed, someone told someone in some capacity. As Dr. Thomas has been talking, I've been reading your body language quite a bit, and there's been a lot of like kind of like hearing a point and something similar to that. 4 out of 5 serial crimes, someone's told somebody that they're feeling like they might do something. What is your takeaway from that kind of number?
It doesn't surprise me. That's my takeaway. I mean,
Wow.
And here's why, because I think folks that maybe are predisposed to commit a more heinous act want the attention. And so if I tell somebody that I'm thinking about this, every time I give it words, I give it more power. And it's all tied into more of the personality disordered structure of some of these folks that go go that direction. I think about all of the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes that have just been on Netflix, and watching him. I think that he was somebody that he liked. He tried to keep it secret in that he wanted to keep doing it, but he liked attention, and he wanted people around. He wanted people. He didn't want to be alone. So folks generally are going to either verbally or physically make their behavior known.
Yeah, I think this satisfies their unmet need for attention in somehow. Yes.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Thomas, I have to ask you, because Amie just talked about watching this documentary. As a person whose background it is, do you find yourself getting immersed in the true crime genre, whether that's podcasts or documentaries or things of that nature?
I don't usually watch those things.
You're not Monday. It's funny, as a guy who loves football and played for a long time, I'll sit there and I'll watch a game and I'll be like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Well, that's obviously not the right thing to do. Do you ever find yourself Monday morning quarterbacking true crime documentaries or anything like that? No, probably not.
Yeah, because I deal with it on a daily basis in real life. So
he doesn't need to watch it at night to yeah, he's living it.
Well, listen, it's so funny because this is the Just Start the Conversation podcast. And so we've had a lot of conversations, and there's always been these points that we always come back to in a social media age, in an age where anything you want to look for is just out there at your fingertips. It's fascinating to me as a person who is on the outside of what you guys do every day. Thank you for doing what you do every day, by the way. But on the outside of doing what you do every day, just hearing some of these statistics, 5% mental illness versus 95%, 4 out of 5 serial crimes. Somebody told somebody. Do you find, Dr. Thomas, that, I guess I'll ask this, as we've been immersed in this kind of everything at your fingertips, media age kind of in the last decade or so, do you find that more people have come out and said, hey, I think something's going on over here? Do you feel like that's one of the positive things? Have you found that with your background and your conversations of, hey, before where some of these things would just kind of happen and almost not even be existent to the public, now people are getting a hint, a clue of something that someone that they know or love might be on the cusp of doing something tragic? Have you found in your experiences that maybe that's actually been one of the kind of takeaways in a positive way of everything that kind of goes on and being available so much, is that maybe there are some more people now who maybe see a red flag and say something's going on over here and give somebody an alert?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I think that is the take-home message from here. If you see any warning signs, when somebody makes allusion to something like that, they should immediately notify the authorities so we can prevent a mass shooting or serial killing or whatever.
Yeah, take it seriously.
Yeah, when in doubt, take it seriously. Well, to both of you, appreciate the work that you do, and thank you so much for the information. Dr. Thomas, would love to have you back anytime to have a conversation. Certainly enjoyed talking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely.
Thank
Amie,
you.
let's make sure Jody gets iced up. All right, we're ready for the next episode. I don't know what some aspirin, something. Let's make sure we send her a little care package or something like that. I'm sure St. Luke's has got some stuff we can send over there, right?
Yeah, we'll fix her up.
Well, thank you all so much for tuning in. It is the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It is brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. For Dr. Alex Thomas, for Amie, Alanson, Dundon, my name is Kevin Crockett. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Just Start the Conversation podcast.